To Harvey Keene, one strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Now, back to Cofield and Company at the Battleborn Broadcast Center on ESPN Las Vegas.
It's just so awesome. Every old call we've played today, legendary old call with Vin Scully. The call is made, he's economical with his words, and then you get the crowd. And that was a perfect game in 1965. As you heard, he time-stamped it again. Sandy Koufax against Harvey Keene. 2-2 to Harvey Keene. I can't do a Vin Scully impression. Let's talk to a professional play-by-play guy. We've been talking a lot about play-by-play today with the passing of Vin Scully. We were also just kind of joking during the break. His 67 years as the voice of the Dodgers, Willie and I are like, my God, we have to work professionally for like another 35 years to work 67 years. I don't think I want to do that. I don't think that's going to happen. But the length of his career is incredible. John Sandler's with us, voice of the Rebels, longtime voice of local baseball as well. It's called football, really called everything, and is a native Southern Californian. John, how are you?
I'm okay, Stevie. How are you?
I'm good. You know what? I'm sure you're sad. I was really sad, and I'm not going to say there's like a cap on how long you should be sad for, but I was really sad reading social media and seeing all the calls for like a good 2 hours last night. I was really moved by the reaction from so many people on the passing of Vin Scully.
Yeah, and I don't think we should be surprised by that. I mean, obviously in the baseball world, he meant so much to so many people. But if you really kind of step back and think about it, you're talking about an American icon. This is the equivalent of, one of the great writers in American history. Well, I mean, I'm going to say the greatest writer in American history passing away, or the greatest artist in American history. This is a cultural icon, the greatest singer in American history. This is Frank Sinatra. This is, you name it. This is, a movie star. This is Clark Gable, Rock Hudson, Robert Redford, Marilyn Monroe, whomever people looked up to. This is that level. And I'm going to be sad for a very long time.
So like you just said, he was a national voice. He was the voice of baseball. But for Southern Californians, this really hits extra hard. So talk about your experience, following the Dodgers, hearing this guy on radio for all those years.
Well, it starts with your first Dodger game. And my first Dodger game was in the 60s. Yeah, I'm old. And I remember walking through the crowd, and I'm, a little kid, 7, I don't know, and thinking to myself, that's so cool that you can hear him everywhere. They pipe his voice around the stadium. That's so cool. And I don't know whether it was then or a little while later, I realized that's not what was happening. It's that everybody at the stadium brought a transistor radio, and if you remember what those are, a little handheld radio, and was sitting there listening to Scully call the game while you're sitting at Dodger Stadium, to the point where, and this is a true story, at one point early in his career in Los Angeles, he had to ask the crowd to turn down their radios because he was getting feedback. Huh. It's insane, but that's what was happening. And you walk through the crowd at Dodger Stadium, and you go to a major league game now. Even you go to an Aviators game, you're going to hear the broadcast in the restroom and maybe at the concession stand, whatever. At Dodger Stadium, it was the atmosphere. It was Vin's voice just sort of wafting through the air at the game. Players will tell you they heard it at times. It was part of the experience, the way the palm trees and the Union 76 sign and all of that. That Vin Scully's voice was part of the ambiance at Dodger Stadium.
John, you talk about cultural icon. We heard a clip earlier. We talked about when he called the Hank Aaron shot, 7:15. He called it. He let it go. Let you hear the crowd, brought you into it, and then described everything. And one of the most poignant moments of that call was when he pointed out, in being celebrated, a black man in the South and being revered. Let's not forget that this is a man that also called Jackie Robinson when he was in Brooklyn with the Brooklyn Dodgers. When you call him a cultural icon, he is so eloquent with his calls that I would have to imagine that he meant so much to the minority races that came through the sport of baseball. in the way that he described them so eloquently.
I'm sure he did. Obviously, I can't speak to that. What you know is that Vin Scully had the respect of every player who came through. And as time went along, I know for a fact that there were players who would come to Dodger Stadium for the first time, and veteran players on that team would say, "You need to go introduce yourself to Mr. Scully." I mean, it was that kind of thing. And, obviously because of the kind of person he was, he would take the time to turn and talk, and, whether he was getting information to use on his broadcast as part of the story he would tell every night. And that's what it was. It was a story every night that he told with an ending that was yet to be determined. Or whether he was just doing it because he was a truly nice human being, as he was when I met him on the field at Dodger Stadium, and then again at Cashman Field later on. There was never a question that he would not treat you the way he wanted to be treated, the way you should have been treated. This was a genuinely nice and appropriate human being.
I would have to imagine, in that story you just told, in terms of like people saying, "Hey, you need to go introduce yourself to Mr. Scully." I remember when John Madden passed this past December, and a few days later, interviewing Herm Edwards after the Las Vegas Bowl, and we talked about it, and he talked about when you first came into the league and when you found out your game was being called by John Madden, you sort of knew that you had arrived. I would imagine for young baseball players, it would feel the same, that respect that, man, I struck out 3 times, but Vin Scully called it.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people have made that point today that it was one of the rites of passage of becoming a big leaguer, of having Vin Scully, call your name. Can you imagine, though, for the kids, and obviously Southern California is a hotbed of baseball. Can you imagine for the kids who grew up in Southern California listening to him, making it to the big leagues with the Dodgers or another team and having him call your name? That had to be just, mind-blowing.
Voice of UNLV Running Rebels, John Sandler, is on with us. A longtime baseball voice as well in the market. From a mechanic standpoint, I know you like the mechanics of play-by-play, and you think about it from the mechanic standpoint. Why was Vin Scully so good?
Number one, he was prepared. And you're given, especially at the major league level, you're given just reams and reams and reams of paper. And I'm sure he did his homework through that, but he did his homework by getting on the field and talking to the players and getting to know them. And then, so being prepared is number one. Number two, and I probably should have made this number one, it was never about him.
Yep.
There are a lot of egos in this business. And he is the greatest of all time by an exponential factor. It will, by light years. And it was never about him. It was about the game, it was about the fans, and it was about the experience. And I think that made him great. He had a unique ability. Baseball is by far the hardest of the 4 major sports to broadcast, because every other sport either has enough action to fill up all the time or has a specific rhythm. Football has a specific rhythm. They break the huddle, they line up, call the signal, there's the play, and then they do it again. And
right.
Baseball has none of that. And he had a truly unique ability to weave his stories, his subject matter into the flow of the game. And if the game was taking precedence at the time, the stories would take a little bit of a backseat. If the game was going a little bit slowly at the time, the stories would be amplified, but you never, ever forgot there was a game going on, or at least you tried not to. He certainly wouldn't let you, and you never missed anything. But it was like going on a ride. It was like you really felt as if you were just sort of traveling along with him. And I said it on Twitter. The focus has been on these amazing calls and these tremendous events that he was associated with. Gibson's home run, which was, otherworldly, and Larson's perfect game, and Aaron's 715th home run, and Dwight Clark's catch, and et cetera, et cetera. But and he rose to all those occasions and gave them absolutely the justice they deserved and more. But I think he was at his most brilliant in the seventh inning of a 6-1 game in the middle of August when the Dodgers were in fourth place. He still made it must listening because of his cadence, of his tone, and of his content. It was just magic.
Really good stuff. John Sandler with us. We'll let you go here in a second, but we got some big stuff coming up for the Runnin' Rebels. You'll be on the road with Curtis Terry. We'll be broadcasting on LV Sports Network, one of our stations, all 3 games of the Canadian Exhibition Tour. So that's really cool. And I've seen you out at practice a couple of times here. They've got 10 practices. So early on, again, another new look team. This is the way of the world in college basketball. What do you think so far based on what you've seen?
Really physical, a lot of size. You've got men out there. I mean, some of these guys who they've brought in, Elijah Parquet from Colorado, Shane Noel from Arizona, they've spent some time in the weight room. And this is a team that's certainly defense is going to be the watchword, and they're not going to get out physicaled on the court. I'm impressed by the versatility of the players. It's obviously incredibly early, the Canadian trip, and I'm so thankful to Learfield and to a couple of sponsors, Whittlesey Bell and Dr. Doug Thomas, who've helped sponsor this trip, and for UNLV to allow us to go and bring it back to the fans. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a great way to sort of introduce all of these new guys to the fans in Las Vegas. And we'll see. I mean, it's obviously very early, but the physicality of this group and the athleticism is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I get the sense that Kevin Kruger from a year ago, and he's always a defense first guy, but experience in the Mountain West up close, and the team got smaller and smaller as the year went along, and couldn't compete as much as it wanted physically against teams like Wyoming. That was one of the missions to go out there, and man, they're big and strong. And I know you love, and so does Curtis, calling Keyshawn Gilbert, disruptor moments on defense. I think I don't know if these guys can all play together, but between Keyshawn back and Eli Parquet from Colorado, and then also Luis Rodriguez from Ole Miss, who is a big 6'6", that they're going to have someone or many guys on the floor at the same time who are disruptors, who are going to be a real pain in the keister for the opposition.
Absolutely. And a lot of these guys are a little bit unknown on the offensive end just because they didn't have that role wherever they were before. I don't know that we're going to see the sort of offensive explosion from one of these guys that we saw with Donovan Williams coming out of Texas. But I think that's an area that they need, and that's an area that I think a lot of fans could look forward to seeing what happens there. I mean, it's going to be an entirely different approach. You're not going to be able to give the ball to Bryce and say, go get me a bucket, the way they did an awful lot last year. But it could very well be a much more balanced approach, and as a result, a much more difficult team to defend.
John, you're awesome, man. We appreciate a couple minutes today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity to talk about Scully. I'll do that anytime, anywhere. The greatest ever.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Steve.
There is John Sandler, voice of the Runnin' Rebels. I just wanted to add to one thing he said about play-by-play people and how prepared Scully was. Prep is gigantic. The other thing is those stories that he told on the air and then depth of knowledge on players, that doesn't happen unless you like listening. And I'm telling you, as John just said, and this is not to bag on broadcasters, we all have egos. To do this, you have to have an ego. But I do know a lot of broadcasters that are mostly interested in speaking, right? They always want to be talking. And they're actually broadcasters off the air. And those people bother me because at times I'm like, do you ever shut up? Like, to tell the story, you have to actually listen. And storytellers like Scully, on radio or TV, and we from print, because you're first and foremost a writer, Willie, that you have to be willing to listen, ask questions, really follow up, and not fade into your own world or worry about what you're going to say next to react.
And I want to point out, when you talk about preparation, Vin Scully was like he was long before there was an internet and computers. There was shorthand and
Yeah.
steno notebooks, pencils and pens and notebooks long before the internet and research and Google and Wikipedia.
Join the conversation on Twitter